Be with me in a moment of prayer and let's pray for our fathers. As we come to this location of worship, we thank you for all who have arrived, for those who have sacrificed of their schedules, their time, their energies, and come to be a part of this service. We are blessed, and so shall you be, for being with us this morning. We thank you for the presence of all, and we especially ask the presence of the Holy Spirit of God to come to touch our hearts, our minds, and we who are gathered here. May we know your presence today. We pray this in Jesus' name. Between the two statements that John made last week that we looked at and what Luke is saying to us today, I was trying to find a phrase that is fairly common among most of us in the 21st century that probably would answer some questions about this. And this is what I came up with. It's too good to be true. It is just too good to be true. New York-based large department store decided to hire a Swedish recent immigrant to the United States. They decided to put him in the mailroom. So the foreman took him downstairs and explained to him, you've got to take these letters and you have to put them in these slots, get the mail sorted out, get it ready to go, put it in the right place at the right time. And the guy turned out to be an absolute whiz. Boy, he just went to work and the letters were everywhere and they were all put. And the foreman watched him for a while to make sure he was doing it right. He said, this is the best performance I have ever seen of a guy in the mailroom. And he watched him all day long to make sure everything was going pretty well. And at the end of the day, the foreman went back to this Swedish immigrant and said, let me shake your hand. He said, I have never seen anybody perform as good as you have this morning. And the Swedish immigrant smiled and he said, well, if you think that's pretty good, wait till I learn how to read English. Where all those letters went? How many times have we been warned? It's too good to be true, it probably is. We have been told that as consumers. We've been told that as people who buy things, wherever you buy them. You've heard of that, said you, right? If it sounds like a really sweet deal and it costs very little money and it's supposed to give you this benefit that you're looking for, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. I think that's some of what's going on with what's here. I mean, if I officiate at your funeral on Friday and I see you sitting in here Sunday morning, I'm going to be a little perplexed. They had more witness to what Jesus had died. They'd seen him put in the tomb, and the stone rolled over. And my Sunday night, he's standing among them. What was it that he said? Let's look at that again. You don't have to read it. Let me read it to you. Just the first two verses there, 36 and 37. While they were still talking about this, what is this they're talking about? They're talking about the events of what had happened. Jesus was crucified and dead on Friday. And by Sunday afternoon, things are changing. The women had been to the tomb. The angels had spoken to them and said, go back and tell the disciples what's going on. And so they rushed back. And while they're talking about this, Jesus appears. Now, it's not some hologram that we're used to in today's world. This is Jesus alive. What does he say? They were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. Wow. Never happened before. Man dead, buried, and now is back in our presence. And Jesus is asking them, Do you need physical proof? Well, here it is. Come touch my hands. Touch my feet. Touch my side. What he's saying is, here is all the physical proof that you need to believe. These guys are still scared. They're thinking, man, it's a ghost, it's an apparition that has come back to haunt me. We're abandoning him and his time with me. Some of them are wanting to believe, but it's a little difficult for them to do so. Fear is a great motivator. It's a large force in our lives. It's been said that Hans Christian Andersen, remember, he storyteller, Hans Brinker, the Silver Skates, a Danish writer, always carried a length of rope with him. Whenever he taught at universities, and he had to get a motel room. Now, motel rooms back then, they were all wood and they were prone to fire. So this length of rope that he took with him was long enough to get him out of the second or third story window of that motel in case the motel caught on fire. That rope is on display at a museum in Odense, Denmark, near his hometown. You can see it. Now, the question is, was he irrational to carry that length of rope with him all of those times? Or was he just being prepared? Some of you will remember this. Sunday, October the 30th, 1938. Some of you can remember. A radio broadcast was sent out from the state of New Jersey from a little-known radio announcer by the name of Orson Welles. How many remember? Giving up your age. The radio broadcast was warning Americans that the War of the Worlds was taking place and that these giant robots in these spaceships were on the east coast of New Jersey and were killing Americans. And do you know that the people on the east coast panicked? Let me tell you what they did. As a result of that broadcast, there were many reported heart attacks, strokes, and suicides. People in the Midwest were so scared that they might get to the Midwest that they moved out to the Dakotas, Montana, and Idaho, and have never come back to the Midwest. They imagined that these giant robots were coming to kill them. Now, today we would say, how gullible would we have to be? We wouldn't fall for something as sensational as that, would we? Would we? How much more sensational was the reappearance of Jesus Christ to his followers? No wonder they were a little slow to believe. And probably if we were there, we would have been slow to believe too. Who wants to fall for something as irrational as seeing a dead man walking? Probably seemed as absurd to them as it would seem to us if we were witnessing it for the first time. So fear and suspicion were a very real part of the first Easter sunrise service. You know how many people in the world today are still afraid to believe that accepting the truth about the risen Jesus Christ is still making them a little panicky? They ask themselves questions like this. What if I committed my life to Jesus Christ only to find out that it is an illusion? And they bring those thoughts into their minds and they become skeptics. They become doubtful. And they don't feel as assured as they once were. But for those of you and those of us who have experienced Christ's presence in our could go around this room and every one of you could give me a story about how Christ has impacted, or you have felt Christ's presence, either at surgery or the birth of a child, or maybe something catastrophic. For those of you who have felt the experience of Christ in your life, there's no question about the reality of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, I believe it's true, but if it were an illusion, wouldn't it be the best possible illusion which could grip this planet? That all people, all persons, all countries, all nations would believe in the power of justice and love and forgiveness in this world. Wouldn't we have a better world? Is there anybody here today who doubts that the world would be improved if everyone lived as if they believed in Jesus Christ? Well, of course not. We all want that to happen. It's not an illusion, as these first disciples discovered. They experienced the nail prints in his hands, the nail prints in his feet, the sword gash in his side, and they knew the truth. They knew the truth, and yet they were terrified. I think there's a second reason that they were reluctant to admit Jesus was alive. It reads in verse 41, this is a little different phraseology, but it says, while they still did not believe, they were filled with joy and amazement. While they did not believe, they were still filled with joy and amazement. In other words, the disciples, at first, seeing him, didn't believe because the news was simply too good to be true. If you came up to me and told me that I had just won the $250 million lotto for the United States, I would probably disbelieve you. First of all, because I don't buy tickets. In second place, I would disbelieve you for joy. It would be too good to be true. I'd want to hold that check in my hand before I would believe it, just to be sure. And so it is with God's gift to us through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. To some people, it seems more like wishful thinking to take place. Isn't that what the secular psychologists and philosophers have tried to convince us over the years? They see faith, our faith, strictly as a matter of a person projecting their highest dreams and their highest aspirations on the rest of society. This is how we as Christians would like to see the world. This is the way it ought to be. So in their way of thinking, it's probably false. Jesus is just too good to be true. But here's the reality of it all. If I did buy the lotto ticket, and I won't, but that's the only way that I have a possibility of winning. And the chance of winning a lotto that big is like 1 to 7.5 million odds. You will be struck by lightning or bit by a great white shark before you'll win a lotto of those kind of magnitude of odds. But I mean, somebody won it. If I bought a ticket, it could be me. Just because it is something that I may have wished for, it doesn't mean that it will come true. But the good news is this, that Jesus Christ in his resurrection power is simply too wonderful for our infinite minds to grasp in totality. There's just so much more there that we don't see, that we don't believe, that we cannot believe at this point, but it doesn't diminish the reality of it. Social worker was telling of being assigned to distribute used clothing in a social center in one of the poorest parts of this town. A mother brings in her 12-year-old son, and what they're looking for is a sports coat that the boy could wear to the next Easter Sunday. Well, the boy is not happy to be there. He's a bit embarrassed, and he'd rather be someplace else. So the social worker began going through this pile of clothes that was about his size, and she says, "Son, come here, I want you to try this one." And so the boy looks at it, and he touches it, and he feels it, and it's, okay, but somebody picked it out. But as he slowly began to put his hands in the sleeves of that jacket, the sales tags fell out. And the manufacturer's tags were still dangling, still attached to the sleeve. His eyes grew wide with excitement when he realized this was a brand new coat. Here is a child who had only known cast-offs and hand-me-downs. And for the first time in his life, he was putting on something new to him, and it was an occasion of great joy for him. I think that's how we feel when we put on Christ for the first time in our lives. It is a joy that we have become new persons in His name. How many of you remember the name Ethel Waters? Ethel was a great singer. Remember the song that she sang that became so popular? His eye is on the sparrow, and I know that He cares for me. Do you know her story? Ethel Waters was born to a mother who was only 12 years of age. Growing up quickly in the slums, her first money that she earned was running errands for other prostitutes. Who could have imagined the change that would take place in Ethel Waters when she encountered the risen Christ in her life? As she described it, she says, "I was headed for self-destruction when the Savior stepped in." Now, this isn't wishful thinking. This isn't something that we hoped might happen. This is reality to this woman. It literally has happened, as it has happened to millions and millions of people over the scope of this great planet. To those who are willing to pay the price of belief, having faith, Jesus Christ can be experienced in your lifetime. I think at first the disciples disbelieved because of fear, and then for joy. But I believe there's a third reason that they were a little bit afraid of accepting the truth, and it's also part of our problem. I think they were afraid that believing in Jesus Christ was going to require changes. Heard about changes? As someone has correctly said, the only person who likes change is a wet baby. Many of us become entrenched in a spiritual rut. And we like that rut. We don't want to get out of that comfort zone. It's something we know, we are experienced with it, we know how we can handle it, and we don't want change in our life. We don't want someone, anyone, or anything to upset our routine. The last thing most people want is change. Perhaps we are afraid to contemplate the idea that Christ is really alive and that the gospel speaks to us and that it's really true and that we are not the Christians that Christ has called us to be, and so we need to make changes. Perhaps if we accept the premise that we can no longer be content with a half-hearted commitment to Christ, or for the purpose of inviting, or for the purpose of welcoming others. Those early disciples who met Jesus Christ risen were forever changed. Forever changed in their lives. They enlisted in His cause. They gave everything in their entire lives to serve Him wherever He might send them. And you know, you made the same commitment when you joined the church, especially the United Methodist Church. Remember what you said on the day that you received membership into this church? It may not have been this church, but when you joined the Methodist Church, you promised that you to support the church with your prayers, your presence, your gifts, and your service. That doesn't mean coming in here for an hour or so on Sunday morning and then forget the church the rest of the time. It means you promised. You made a vow to support your church with your prayers, your presence. I don't mean P-R-E-S-E-N-T-S, P-R-E-S-E-N-C-E. You'll be here. Your presence, your gifts, and your service. Malcolm Muggeridge died in the fall of 1990. He was a highly intelligent person. served at various times as a war correspondent, as a foreign correspondent, news editor, and a well-known television personality of Great Britain. He came to Christ in the church and the Christian life fairly late in his life, and he wrote of his dilemma as being a journalist turned believer. He began writing books after he experienced Jesus Christ in his life, such works as Jesus Rediscovered, Christ and the Media, Something Beautiful for God, and then his multi-column autobiography of Chronicles of Wasted Time. And what he meant by wasted time were the years prior to his conversion to Christianity. He was once asked, would you be willing to tell us about that feeling that you had when you converted from non-Christian to Christian? And he said, I'd be happy to. And I want to quote this for you. I'd be very glad to do so because I thought about it quite often. In World War II, when I was in North Africa, I heard a lieutenant colonel first use the phrase, displaced person. That phrase became very important to me because it is also a good definition of a person who has come to see that this life is not about carnal things or successes, but it's about eternity rather than time, that I now no longer believe I belong here, but this is where I'm staying for now. End quote. The point is that Malcolm Muggeridge came to a radical change rather late in his life, to the realization that Jesus Christ is real and is alive within this person. But what Muggeridge discovered, much to his amazement, was that his current life after Christ was far superior than his life prior to Christ. And he writes about it a lot. I don't really belong here, but I'm staying here for now. What he's saying, I will never go back to the old life. I will never go back to what I was doing before. Those carnal things are no longer good for me in my new Christian life. I've got to put away those bad things. I've got to put away that bad language. I've got to put away lying and cheating and all that stuff. It's got to go. For me to represent Jesus Christ in this world. Without a show of hands and without any kind of comment, have you made that discovery in your personal life? There is little joy in a half-hearted belief. There's some joy there, but there is little joy. There is greater joy in a full commitment to the person of Jesus Christ. Far too many of us have just enough religion to make us miserable. We know what we should or should not be doing, but we don't carry it far enough. To let the Christ speak through us. To ask Christ to come in and dominate our lives. To give up of self. To allow Christ to come in. Speak through us and for us. But Christ wants us to. Christ wants to come and make a miracle of your mind. Would you bow your heads with me, please? For the quiet moments that Christ speaks to us at this moment. The acknowledgement of Christ being the superior power of our lives. For the moment when we give up of self-control and ask for Christ's control, we then become the Easter people, raising our voices until He comes to see us again. When we leave this place, may we be the Christians Christ has asked us to portray. Now let us get this listen. things we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.